In 2022, a small plane spent weeks crawling back and forth over a remote stretch of the Bolivian Amazon, firing a laser at the ground 100,000 times every second. For as long as anyone had bothered to ask, the answer about what lay under that endless green roof was always the same. Nothing. Wild, untouched rainforest, the way it had supposedly always been. Then the team did something clever with all those laser pulses. They told the computer to digitally strip the trees away and look only at the shape of the bare ground underneath. What appeared on the screen stopped them cold. Straight lines, clean right angles, raised roads running arrow straight for kilometers, and rising out of the forest floor, pyramids. They had found an entire city that had been sitting in plain sight under the leaves for 5 centuries. In my opinion, it quietly overturns one of the biggest assumptions we have ever made about our own planet, that the Amazon is a wilderness at all. Over the next few minutes, I want to walk you through how a whole civilization can vanish under a forest, why generations of explorers searched for it and lost their minds in the process, and how a beam of light finally found what boots on the ground never could. This is not a story about ruins. Really, it is a story about a place we were sure we understood and never quite did. Start with the old story, the one almost all of us absorbed without noticing. Through most of the last century, the scientific verdict was blunt. Any great civilization here was simply impossible, the experts said. Amazonian soil is famously thin and sour, the kind that swallows nutrients and gives almost nothing back. Rivers flood, heat rots everything, and the forest grows so fast it devours any clearing within a season. Maybe a few small tribes scattered through the trees, but cities, roads, kingdoms, out of the question. Nature in its rawest form, a green engine that had never been tamed and never could be. That belief was so comfortable and so total that hardly anyone thought to question it. Yet it had a loose thread, and the thread was a legend. Spanish expeditions came back from the basin in the 1540s, carrying a story that would haunt Europe for 400 years. They told of El Dorado, a city of gold hidden somewhere in the green, ruled by a king so rich he dusted his whole body in gold each morning. To a Europe drunk on the silver of the Andes, no prize could be greater. Over the following centuries, men marched into the trees looking for golden towers, and the forest swallowed them whole. Most vanished. Those who staggered out brought back only fever and ruin. Slowly, El Dorado curdled from a destination into a punchline, a fairy tale that foolish men kept dying to chase. Buried inside the fairy tale, though, was an eyewitness report that should have changed everything. Back in 1542, a Spaniard named Francisco de Orellana became the first European to travel the entire length of the Amazon, and the friar who chronicled the journey described something astonishing. Far from empty jungle, he wrote, the riverbanks were lined with towns, some stretching for miles. Crowded with so many people, he compared the sight to the cities of Spain. His reward for that honesty was to be branded a liar. Every later traveler found a forest that looked nothing like that, so the easy conclusion was that he had invented the whole thing to glorify his expedition. His report sat in the archives, dismissed as colonial bragging for the better part of 500 years. One man refused to let it go, and his name still gives me a chill. Percy Fawcett, a British Army officer and surveyor, made 7 expeditions into the Amazon between 1906 and 1924. Fawcett was no crank. He actually dismissed El Dorado itself as an exaggerated romance. What he came to believe instead was that something real lay beneath the myth. Old colonial documents described roads and bridges and towns. He had handled broken pottery and walked over strange earthworks. Out of all of it, he built a theory around a lost city he simply called Z. Then, in 1925, with his son and one friend, he marched into the jungle to find it, sent out one final note, and was never seen again. To most experts, his disappearance settled the matter. There was no city. There never had been. You do not lose yourself searching for something that is real. If these places had ever existed, then where on earth were they? Here is the detail that, to my mind, makes the whole thing so maddening. Stone does not last in the rainforest, and these builders worked mostly in earth and wood, which the jungle digests within decades. One wall slumps into a low ridge. A plaza becomes a clearing that quietly fills back in. Each pyramid ends up a suspiciously regular hill wearing 2 centuries of trees. Cross one of these sites on foot, machete in hand, and every direction would show you the same thing. More forest. The evidence was never missing, only invisible from the ground, hidden by the very thing growing on top of it. Everything changed the moment we stopped looking from the ground. LiDAR is the tool that finally cracked the case open, and it works a little like a bat using sound, except with light. Fly low, fire millions of laser pulses straight down at the canopy, and most of them bounce off leaves. Yet a tiny fraction slip through every little gap and reach the actual soil. Time how long each pulse takes to return. Repeat it millions of times, and you can build a flawless 3-dimensional map of the ground. Then mathematically erase every single tree to expose the bare bones of the land. For the first time in history, we could take the forest off the Amazon and study what it had been hiding. Researchers aimed that beam at the Llanos de Mojos in Bolivia, and a lost world swam into focus. What they found has a name now: the Casarabe culture, a people who thrived there from roughly the year 500 to 1400. This was no single village. 26 settlements appeared in the data, knitted into one sprawling network, with 2 enormous centers at its heart. At the core of each sat a ceremonial heart bristling with stepped platforms and earthen pyramids, the tallest standing as high as a 7-story building straight up out of the jungle floor. Rings of concentric banks wrapped around them like grooves cut into a vast target. Causeways reached outward from the hubs. Raised roads laid dead straight for kilometers at a stretch, stitching the whole region together. What gets me most, honestly, is the water. These people had carved canals and dug reservoirs across an entire floodplain, engineering the flow of the land itself so they could farm and live exactly where the textbooks swore no one could. Scientists give this a careful name: low-density tropical urbanism. Rather than crush itself into a tight stone grid like Rome, a city like this spreads out in green fingers, woven through the forest instead of bulldozing it. There is a quiet genius in that. Spread a city thin enough, and the rainforest stops being an obstacle to be cleared away and quietly becomes part of the architecture itself, offering shade and flood control in one. Where dense stone would only bake and rot, these builders shaped settlements that breathed with the land, blending homes and farmland into one living machine that moved with the floodplain instead of fighting it. Once you know the pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. Bolivia was no lucky one-off either. Then, in 2024, another laser survey over the Upano Valley in Ecuador exposed something even older and even larger. More than 6,000 earthen platforms, 15 urban centers laced together by roads, ringed by terraced fields, a whole farmed countryside hiding under the trees. Those cities turned out to be at least 2.5 millennia old, more than a millennium older than anyone believed complex society in the Amazon could possibly be. Site after site, the same verdict keeps landing. Far from empty, the forest had been crowded. Buildings are only half of the revelation. The other half is the part I find almost impossible to stop turning over. Feeding a city takes good soil, and the Amazon, remember, is supposed to have terrible soil. So how did they manage it? Here is the twist. They did not find good earth anywhere. They manufactured it. Scattered across the basin lie patches of a strange, deep, charcoal-black dirt that scientists call Terra Preta, which simply means dark earth. 2 to 3 times richer than the worthless ground around it, this soil is not natural at all. People built it on purpose over generations, working charcoal, ash, broken pottery, and food scraps into the floor until dead jungle became some of the most fertile soil on the planet. 10 centuries on, it is still fertile. These were not people building on top of the land. They were rewriting the chemistry of it. That single fact reframes the entire forest. Most of us grew up calling the Amazon pristine, the great untouched lung of the earth, nature without a human fingerprint anywhere on it. Researchers who study it most closely now suspect almost the opposite. Huge stretches of it look less like wild jungle and more like an overgrown garden, a green world quietly engineered by human hands across long centuries. Even the trees we treasure may belong to that design. The useful fruit and nut species cluster suspiciously along the lines of old settlements, less a random wilderness than an orchard planted by people we forgot ever lived. If that is right, then the wildest place on the planet is partly an artifact. We have been admiring a monument and calling it scenery. How many people it took to do all this is where I have to be straight with you, because the experts argue and the numbers are genuinely hard to pin down. Even so, what keeps emerging is genuinely staggering. Individual settlements that may have held tens of thousands. A basin that, taken as a whole, could have been home to millions. Whole basins that, taken together, may have rivaled the great kingdoms of medieval Europe. All of it unfolding right where we were certain almost no one had ever set foot. Even the cautious, conservative version of this is enough to redraw the map of the ancient world. There is something bigger hiding inside all of this, beyond the thrill of a lost city. Through 2 centuries, we built a whole idea of human history on the notion that real civilization needs what Europe had: stone, the plow, a conquered countryside bent to our will. The Amazon was the great counterexample, the proof that some places simply defeat us. Flip the story around, and the lesson inverts. Here was a civilization that never beat the rainforest into submission at all. Instead, it learned to grow inside the forest, feeding millions without clear-cutting the canopy, working with the water and the soil rather than against them. In an age when we are burning that same forest to make room for cattle, the people we wrote off as primitive may turn out to have understood something we forgot, which leaves the obvious, aching question. If millions of people once lived here, where did everyone go? And why did the forest look so empty by the time Europeans arrived to write it all down? Its answer is quiet, and in its own way, devastating. When the first outsiders reached the Americas after 1492, the deadliest thing they carried was invisible. Old world diseases, against which these populations had no defense, traveled faster than any army, often racing ahead of the explorers themselves along the very trade routes the locals had built. Across a few terrible generations, the great Amazonian societies came apart. You can actually read the collapse in the mud. Layers of charcoal from all those managed fires and cleared fields hold steady for 2,000 years, then plunge in the 1600s to the lowest point in the entire record. The fires went dark because the gardeners were gone, almost overnight by the slow clock of a forest. With no one left to hold the trees back, the forest did what forests do. Free at last, it surged over the plazas, the causeways, and the pyramids, and within a couple of centuries, it had drawn a perfect green curtain across the whole of it. By the time anyone went hunting for cities, the cities had already been swallowed, and the silence was mistaken for emptiness. Here, then, is the cruel twist that, if you ask me, is almost beautiful. Percy Fawcett, the man history filed away as a deluded dreamer, turned out to be wrong about the gold and right about the bones of his idea. Lost cities really were sleeping under the canopy. He was simply hunting them in the only way his era allowed, on foot, half blind, a century too early for the beam of light that would finally prove him right. Orellana and his ridiculed friar earned the same apology. The jungle that defeated all of them was never empty at all. All along, it had been the graveyard of a civilization, dressed up in a costume of leaves. What lingers for me is not the gold or the pyramids. Rather, it is how completely a world can hide by simply being overgrown. An entire civilization of people, their roads and reservoirs and gardens, did not so much crumble into legend as get quietly tucked under a blanket of leaves, until even their own descendants forgot the shape of what lay beneath. That green carpet we keep calling untouched wilderness may be the largest garden ever planted and the grandest gravestone ever raised, both at the same time. Out there, even now, the lasers keep flying, stripping the canopy back one valley at a time, and every few months, another buried map of streets and pyramids floats up out of the green. We have peeled the trees off only a handful of small windows so far, and found a marvel in every single one. The rest of that vast green ocean is still sealed shut, which means the real headline was never what we found beneath the Amazon, but how much of it we have not even started to read.